As Lori said, I joined Tufts about 3 years ago, and it has been great so far. I was asked to give a kind of like a brief kind of introduction to my journey and my personal experiences. I did not have a slide, so I will keep it short. I was born and raised in Iran. And then I did my undergraduate and first master's degree in Iran in civil engineering, and I worked in engineering practice for about 6, 7 years in Iran, working on designing dams and water infrastructure systems. And I moved to the States about 20 years ago to do my PhD. I did my second master's and PhD in civil engineering again, and also a graduate certificate in GIS and remote sensing, all of them at the University of Delaware. I worked for about a year in an engineering firm in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and then I decided to move down all the way to Mississippi. I was a faculty at Mississippi State University for 11 years. Then I guess I got tired of warm weather, so I decided to move up in August 2023. As Lori said, my journey has been, my work has been pretty much kind of can be defined in my core disciplinary area, which is by training, I'm a geotechnical engineer. So for some of you who may not know about geotechnical engineering is a field within civil engineering field. We are dealing with dirt, or better to say soil, earthen infrastructures, foundations, how you can build your foundation stronger, how you can design embankments. And within that field, I've been focusing on to better understand how we can better design and analyze slopes, embankments, dams, levees. At the same time, a strong emphasis of my work over the past 10, 15 years has been how we can integrate geotechnical engineering, or even broader civil engineering field, in a multidisciplinary framework to address some of the grand challenges that we are dealing in terms of addressing issues related to climate change, addressing issues related to equity. And it has been my primary focus, and I've been enjoying learning and exploring. I've been fortunate to have great colleagues and great team members. We have some of them here, and my colleagues. So it has been the best part of my job, honestly, to explore and learn. I'm passionate about what we do and what we learn. And I'm very passionate about when I see the impact. This is well beyond driving like 5 pages of analytical derivation. When I see the real impact, that's my passion. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to share some of our work in this area. I'm going to talk about different problems. Please don't get overwhelmed. It shows that we have some sort of, I don't know, they call it ADHD or whatever. We are working on different problems, but the overarching umbrella is how we can develop community-based science-informed solution to make sure our infrastructure systems are resilient. My primary hat is still a civil engineer. But I'm going to show how we can work with other fields to kind of address some of those problems to make impact. And that's what we are going to do. So some statistics and number. Why should we care about basically climate resilient and equitable infrastructure? If you think about it, when we talk about climate resilient and equitable infrastructure, we are talking about 3 corners of one triangle. One piece is climate stressors or hazards. The other piece is infrastructure. The third piece is communities and end users. So let's look at some number. This shows the number of billion-dollar extreme weather events happening in the United States since 1980. As you can see, there's a very obvious increasing trend. Despite all advances, despite all investment that we have made, you see that we're still spending more and more, and we have the losses are increasing. Something's happening. Part of that is climate change, worsening patterns of extremes in some regions, but we cannot blame climate change for every single problem that we have. That's one part of the problem. The other part can be, are we ready, or infrastructure systems are ready to deal with this changing climate? The other part is, are we preparing our vulnerable population to cope and deal with that? So this is one part of it. And those are some numbers about some of more like extreme events and the cost of those extreme events that we have in the United States. And some of them are more geohazards, that's the type of things that we are focusing on, like landslides, land subsidence, or like flooding, coastal erosion. And you see the numbers are significant. That's something that, and it's not just economic loss. They can cause fatalities, and they do cause fatalities, and they're increasing in several regions. But the other thing is, why should I care about communities? So we learn about infrastructure system, we learn about extremes, but why should I care about communities? Unfortunately, there are several studies showing that typically those people who have had the least contribution to climate change or anthropogenic climate change, they're paying the highest price for climate change. So we are kind of punishing them for lack of access or lack of resources that they have. This is an example. I use it quite often. This actually happens the time that I was flying to Boston for my first interview here at Tufts. I landed in Boston. It was a Saturday, I believe, or Sunday. And then I checked my email. There was an email from LA Times reporter that I talked to her before about levees. By the way, a large portion of my work is focusing on water infrastructure system like dams, levees. And the question was, there was a recent levee failure in Pajaro, California. Any comments, any feedback? And I shared some of the technical issues that we knew about the area and levee systems. And then at the end, she asked any other comment. I said, look at the communities around that levee failure. They're very poor communities, and this is an unincorporated area. They don't have even a post office. And we knew that the levee system is not in good shape. They had an unprecedented flood, a marginal levee system, and underserved community. So that triangle again. And I said, look into the community. 2 hours later, she called me saying that, oh, I could get a hold of somebody from the Army Corps. And the gentleman interestingly admitted that, yes, we knew that there is something going on, but we did not take any action because it was not worth it. Because we had to pay the construction cost of Bay Area, but this is not a affluent community, or we don't have much assets. So we knew it's going to fail, but we did not take any action. You saw those three corners of triangle. Marginal infrastructure, we knew that levee is not in good shape. Unprecedented flood, partly attributed to climate change, and underserved communities. And this is not just in California. This is a recent article by Boston Globe. Boston Globe decided to do a series of articles about flood risk in Massachusetts. When I talked to the reporter, I suggested her, of course, I'm biased about levees. And so I said, take a look at levees in the state of Massachusetts. It's not very intuitive to talk about levees in Massachusetts, but make a guess. How many people live behind levees in the state of Massachusetts? Any number, just in the state of Massachusetts. We do have levee systems in the state of Massachusetts, but give me a number about 500,000. It was a good number, close. We have over 300,000 people living behind levees in the state of Massachusetts. And the reporter actually then, she said that she was surprised to see the extent of population living behind, and more interesting, or unfortunately, how disproportional underserved communities living behind levees here. As a matter of fact, as a part of a study that we published in 2023, and Asar, my PhD student sitting here, he was a lead contributor to that. We kind of analyzed all levee systems across the nation, and the state of Massachusetts, unfortunately, has one of the highest disparity in terms of overrepresentation of vulnerable communities behind levees. We will talk about that. So that's what we have. And this is the infrastructure side. This is the latest American Infrastructure Report Card, which was published in 2024. I had the opportunity to be one of the lead authors for 2 chapters on dams and levees. And as you can see, overall grade is C, 2 factors. On the negative side, of course, not a grade to be proud of. But the positive side is the highest grade that we have received so far. So you can see the grades. For levees, we have a D+. For dams that I was also involved with, is a D+. So overall, you see consistent pattern. So we need to do something about that. So this is, again, the same 3 corners that we talked about that. So my work has been how we can address the issues at the intersection of those 3 corners. In my group, basically what we have done is we realized that we need a multidisciplinary framework. It's not just an engineering problem. It's not just a climate problem. It's not a social science problem. So, and it's not just only a policy problem. It's something at the intersection of all those fields. So we said that we need to establish a multidisciplinary research agenda to address climate resilient and equitable infrastructure. So that has been the notion that I've been promoting over the past 10, 15 years. Almost affiliated, I forgot to say that I'm affiliated with the United Nations University, which is the scientific arm of the United Nations. In that capacity, I'm also promoting this concept of resilient and equitable infrastructure nationally and globally. So this is what we have done. And as a part of the process, we have proposed a 5-step framework. We said to address the issues related to climate resilient and equitable infrastructure, we have proposed a 5-step framework that we have been applying to all of our projects. So the unifying umbrella that you will see throughout this lecture is this 5-step framework. I guess that's the only thing that we know and we do in our group, but we apply that to different things. I'm going to show some of the results from different problems, but I want you to keep that 5-step framework in mind as we go through different steps. So let's start from the first step, community assessment and identification. The first step is to understand who is living behind those infrastructure systems, or who is using those infrastructure systems? Who will be impacted by disruption on those infrastructure systems? And what the stressors are they dealing with? And what's the status of those infrastructure systems? So this is an example of course, levees. This is the National Levee Database. Those red circles are the levee systems that are basically documented in National Levee Database. Is a congressionally funded initiative by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So they have documented about 27,000 miles of levees across the nation. 24,000 miles of levees. It's estimated over 23 million people live behind those levees, and it's estimated that those levee systems are protecting over $2 trillion of assets and properties behind them. So it's a nationwide kind of problem. And of course, if there is something happening, the consequences can be catastrophic. Top right, you see post-Hurricane Katrina levee failure. That levee failure is recognized as the second worst disaster in engineering history. After nuclear power plant leakage in Chernobyl nuclear power plant, this Hurricane Katrina levee failure is recognized as the second worst disaster. The bottom one is the levee failure that happened in California. So if we want to do this climate resilient and equitable levee system, what do we have? We are dealing with basically evolving risk, which, as you can see on the left, sorry. On the left, we are dealing with evolving attributes to exposure. We are dealing with evolving attributes to hazard and evolving attributes to vulnerability. So for example, we are dealing with more frequent flooding or more severe flooding in several regions, not all, everywhere. Or we are dealing with more severe drought. You might think too much water will be always a problem. No. One underestimated risk of climate change to infrastructure is drought impact, which is understudied, honestly. Everybody's focusing on too much water, but too little water can cause its own problem too. In terms of vulnerability, we are dealing with aging infrastructure, that age decay. And also exposure. We have land use, land cover change. We have population change. For example, in the Northeast United States, one of the direct impact of climate change has been population migration to coastal areas. So now you're talking about kind of like a different patterns. So why do we have people more, vulnerable groups more affected by potential levee failures? Why? Typically we are talking about low-lying lands, which are not very attractive. So you see kind of more, like I would say, vulnerable population living behind levees. And it will be compounded because typically they have less access to resources and they have other socioeconomic barriers that make them more vulnerable to any potential, basically, levee failures. Lower education, lower income, other factors that can all play to each other. So what did we do? We said that, okay, this is part of the results that we did. We did analysis at the state level, we did the analysis at the regional level, we did this analysis at the national level. For each state, we wanted to look at the overrepresentation of vulnerable population behind levee system. And what you see on the y-axis is an index that we define as disparity percentage. What does it show? It shows what's the percentage of overrepresentation of that vulnerable group in levied area compared to non-levied area. So, for example, in like a state of Massachusetts, if we have 20% population of, I don't know, African American, for example, in non-levied area, you would expect to have about the same composition in levied area. But when you have 30% African American population behind levees versus 20% in non-levied area, it shows disparity. And that's what it represents. It represents relative increase in that presentation of or over the composition of that vulnerable group. So what you can see, and the spider plot on the top shows the number of states for each group that had disparities. As you can see, not surprisingly, for poverty, low education, and also disability, more than 40 states, they have disparities. They have overrepresentation of those vulnerable groups living behind levees. So this is how we can analyze disparities. We said that, okay, and then we also use this tool, which was developed under previous administration to identify what is called disadvantaged community. So this disadvantaged designation was identified based on several barriers, environmental barrier, economic barriers. So if you didn't meet certain criteria, if you would fall below a certain threshold, that census tract or census block would be designated as disadvantaged. So we'll look at disadvantaged communities behind levees, and we can compare them with the composition of disadvantaged population in non-levied areas. And the results was, unfortunately, very significant in terms of disparities. Nationwide, we have 40% overrepresentation of disadvantaged population behind levees. And we look at different regions, and look at the Northeast. Dark red. Among the highest disparities were, and you can find Massachusetts almost getting close to black. Among the highest disparities that we have. Honestly, I was surprised that I was expecting somewhere like in I don't know, Louisiana or like some other in California, but we are doing worse in some of our northeast kind of state, northeastern states. So that's what we did. And then we kind of use the same approach for other infrastructure systems. This is another study. We look at Superfund sites. Most of you know that Superfund sites are the most contaminated sites across the United States. Overall, we have about, I believe, over 13,000 Superfund sites as part of this EPA program. Out of 13,000 Superfund sites, about 10% are listed in a list called National Priority List, NPL. So what does it mean? Superfund sites that are listed in that NPL are prioritized for cleanup activities. How those sites are selected? Those sites are selected based on a score sheet and an arbitrary threshold. If a site exceeds that threshold, it will be listed in National Priority List. What did we do? We said that let's look at those Superfund sites, all of them, over 13,000 Superfund sites. And let's look at the distribution of those. Which communities are exposed to those contaminated sites? Do we need to revisit our scoring system in terms of prioritizing those that they have lower risk threshold? So we'll look at them, and this is what we got. First thing first, we learned that over 80% of US population, that number is scary. Over 80% of US population live within 10 kilometers of at least one Superfund site. So look at your neighborhood. You should be able to find one nearby. So, and also we noticed that there is a significant overrepresentation of Asian, African American, and population designated as disadvantaged in proximity to Superfund sites. And then we identified the problem, of course, a very extensive problem. We wanted to also propose solution. And to make it easy and understandable, we adopted this urgency importance matrix for decision making, and we called it action priority matrix. So on the x-axis, we have what a score that we propose as Superfund saturation score. Basically, it shows that, per kilometer, how many basically, what's the density of Superfund site in that particular state or region or nationwide. On the x-axis or the y-axis, we have that disparity percentage. Again, what are we trying to do? We are trying to identify that we have to prioritize. What's the goal? To inform decision making for prioritizing cleanup activity. And then we did the analysis, and this is the results of the analysis that you might see. We are presenting different things. The size of the circles shows the population identified at disadvantage. And we define the boundaries of those x and y axis with national medians. And the darker the color is, it means that you have higher percentage of disadvantaged population in the host tracts. When I say host, a tract, that census tract that is hosting a Superfund site. So with that, we will identify those states or those places that are in urgent need for cleanup activities. So we didn't just do like a exposure analysis. We wanted to also inform decision making. We have been doing this for different infrastructure systems, but I just wanted to show two examples of Superfund sites and levees. Let's move to the second step. The second step is, okay, we did our homework. We did our desk study. We exhausted all data that we have for hazard, communities, infrastructure system. The next step is, once we identify priority zone, we have to establish a two-way dialogue with end users, stakeholders, to better understand their perception, to better understand their information shortfall, to better understand their priorities, existing practices, their needs. One major problem that we have in engineering project that we do even community engagement is we do community engagement at the end. I have my design done. I'm going to community and say, no, I have this magical design, take it or leave it. That's not how it should go. It should be something that we have to work with those end users from the beginning to the end to make sure their voice is incorporated, particularly for those communities that their voice has been historically ignored. So let's look at some examples of the project that we did and some of the results that we have for the second step. We had a project from National Weather Services. The goal of the project was how we can integrate environmental justice into National Weather Service tools and products. National Weather Services is under NOAA, and they're in charge of creating tools, warning systems, monitoring tools for all kinds of extremes. So the goal was how can we integrate equity and justice into National Weather Service tools and products. There are several studies showing that targeted communication, targeted risk communication can make a huge impact in the outcome of that risk communication. So what did we do? As part of that study, we selected 3 study areas, Mississippi, New York, and Maine. And we intentionally selected 3 different areas with very different contexts. Mississippi rural areas with dominant hazards being pretty much hurricanes and flooding. New York, urban setting, crazy dense population with dominant hazard being floods and heat wave. And also we selected like a tribe in Maine with dominant hazard with severe snowstorm and river icing. So we wanted to have a diversity in terms of composition of population, dominant hazards, and then work with those. So what did we do with them? And this is an example of when we started the project, we had focus group with emergency manager of those counties in Mississippi. And a few months later, a tornado happened in the same area. It basically did wipe out the whole kind of town of what is called Rolling Fork. One major issue was lack of proper and timely communication for evacuation. The damage was significant. And honestly, I was not surprised because when we had the discussion with the emergency manager of that county, it was hard for us to reach out to the person. We had to call the emergency manager of the neighbor county, and she had to call the wife of emergency manager of this county and get a hold of the wife, and the wife would tell the emergency manager that that's what they're working on. And when we asked what is the primary source of information that you use for messaging and warning system, he said this neighboring county emergency manager, she has a great Facebook page. Whatever she posts on her Facebook page, I copy and paste and put them in. So when something like this happened, I was not surprised. So what did we do? We started talking to, we organized several focus groups. Focus groups, and we did community survey. For focus group, we have 3 target population: emergency managers, to better understand how local communities or local decision makers deal with emergencies. We talked to National Weather Service local officers that they work in like a state, and also we talked to NOAA headquarters in DC that they're setting policy. Under previous administration, one of the goals was this notion of service equity. NOAA was promoting this notion of service equity. First thing first, we wanted to understand, what does service equity mean in the context of National Weather Services? And then what we did was basically we organized focus groups with, I think we talked to about 40, 45 emergency managers from 7, 8 different states: Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Alabama, New York, Maine, I think New Jersey. So this is something published. So you see the results of those kind of focus group discussion. We wanted to identify what are the primary tools and resources they use. Do they have any specific procedure in place to kind of prioritize those historically underserved and socially vulnerable communities? Are they using any targeted communication for those people? Are they using any specific messaging system? The answer was no. In some regions, depends on that person, they might have their own kind of practice to inform them easier. So, and also we did community survey. We talked to communities. And one thing that also we did, we gave the same question to emergency manager and community residents. And we asked emergency manager to respond on behalf of community residents to see how they think about the people that they're working with. We found significant discrepancy in terms of how emergency managers think their people have issues, which is something that definitely we need to work on it. But based on all those results, we proposed a new framework. It's a busy figure, but I try to keep it simple. We propose a new metrics. We call it service equity metrics. What does it show? We said that in order to serve each community based on their needs, priorities, and their dominant hazards, what we have to do, we have to basically understand how they perceive risk. So this is something that what we have to do is, we said that we can say objective risk versus subjective risk. And I like this idea of objective risk and subjective risk. Objective risk is what you do for like you're using your engineering tools or fancy models. We say, oh, this is actual physical risk in the area. But no matter how good we do, communities, they have their perception of risk, how they perceive risk. The larger the gap between subjective and objective, the higher the consequence of any event. Ideally, if we can bridge the gap between the two, we have a better chance to deal with extremes. So we said that we have to get both objective and subjective risk. Objective risk is coming from National Risk Index and other tools that we have. On subjective risk, we collected data from communities, local decision makers, to better understand how they perceive risk that they have in that area. So we did that, and then we identified misalignments. Then we also defined a metric called quality of service. We noticed there is similar index in other service sectors, like, I don't know, power system or like communication, system. We said that for risk communication, we have to have also quality of service. Based on the results of survey, based on the results of focus group, we identified 3 main pillars for quality of service. One is quality of technology, the second quality of communication, and quality of engagement. For each pillar, we define attributes. And then we did that combine them to define quality of service. We got objective risk from National Risk Index and the other modes. We got subjective risk from community survey and focus group discussion. We integrated them using different results. The idea was, where are the largest misalignments? And then we define basically where we have the worst situation that we need to take urgent action. Where is the worst? It's a busy plot, but to make it easier, I'm just going to go through the first row. Where is the worst situation? The worst situation is when the actual risk is pretty high, but nobody knows. And that's what's happening. Subjective risk shows very low. objective risk is pretty high, and the quality of service is pretty low. And quality of service can represent the spatial resolution, the coverage, timeliness of the service warning system. So that's why we kind of define some zones for urgent action or like some other proactive actions. And we define a number of potential activities under each scenario. So the goal is to inform that basically integrating equity into risk communication. Another example is a project that we have in California. The idea of this project is how we can better address the issues of wildfires and cascading hazards around wildfire, particularly in disadvantaged communities. It's a large group of a multidisciplinary team. We have, I think, 9 or 10 faculty from 6, 7, I use 6, 7 quite often, 7 universities, ranging from psychologists, social scientists, civil engineers, hydroclimatologists. So as a part of this study in that area is called Lake County in Northern California. Since 2015, over 60% of the county has burned. 60%. The first time that we visited the site, it's like traveling back to 60s. Believe me, it's like 2 hours from Sacramento. It's Northern California. It's just amazing to see how disconnected and isolated communities live. They still have large population living in temporary housing, like trailers, still after several years. As a part of this study, when we were like visiting the site, we noticed there is a huge landslide. I don't know if you can see that. This is an aerial image, and I don't know if you can see it. This is the slide, and this is a huge landslide. And this happened to be right at the downstream of large earth dams. And this happened to be the densest population in the county. And this happened to be a wildfire site. And we said, wow, like somebody made all the things happen. And we said, wildfires, people, the community, that people living in that Spring Valley, oh, by the way, indigenous people living in Spring Valley, one of the densest population in the county. And there's a creek going down, and whatever happens to this slide can directly impact the structure of the dam. It can block the creek. And this area has burned multiple times. And we said, oh, we have this massive landslide. And I like this idea of, again, objective versus subjective risk. We wanted to understand, we do our engineering, we use satellite data, we did in situ monitoring. We have been monitoring the site for the past 4 years. We did modeling using our fancy, colorful maps. At the same time, we wanted to see how much they know about the landslide risk. So we took this approach of objective versus subjective in terms of landslide. So objective, what did we do? We used digital elevation model, Google Earth imagery. We used a slope stability model, monitoring data, and we wanted to identify instability patterns, susceptibility, and hotspots. And on the subjective risk, we had psychologists and social scientists in the team. They did a 2-wave survey of communities. About 800 people from the community were surveyed, 2 waves, one pre-fire season, one after fire season, to understand how much they care about wildfires. The results of objective risk shows that the slide is continuously moving from 1953 to 2021 in some areas. You can see the elevation, and look at the scale of the y-axis. It's like, we are talking about like, look at the middle. It's about like 15 meter, 20 meter movement. It's a monster landslide. For those of you who work in landslide area, that is a kind of textbook example of massive landslide. But interestingly, look at the subjective risk assessment. This says we ask community about which hazard or risk you care about most. Look at the results for landslide. They said this is the least concerning hazard for us. And this is for Indian Valley people. This is just downstream of the landslide. What does it tell us? The first step of risk mitigation is risk awareness. If you are not aware of risk, no matter how colorful my map is, no matter how strong my models are, we are not prepared. That is something that we are trying to work, and we are working with directly. We are working this project with the county office. We directly had input in county hazard mitigation plan. they use our models, results, and we offer teacher workshop. We work with emergency managers. We have a website that they're using it. So that's another example. So let's move to the third step. The third step is, okay, we did community identification. We established two-way dialogue with communities. Now let's quantify risk under current and different projected future scenarios. So I'm going to use different examples of risk assessment. Of course, levees will be one of them. Speaking of levees, this is the same on the left. On the left, you see the same database of national levee database using basically the purple, whatever color is that. And then we created a database as a part of a project that I've been doing with one of my PhD students in collaboration with the US Army Corps. We compile a database of about 500 levee failure happened in the nation. And then we said that, okay, if we have those levee failure events documented, and for each failure, we compile several attributes to better understand key drivers of failures. So we did that. What was the goal? The goal is to develop models that we can predict when and under what condition levees fails. And then we use a suite of models. I'm not going to get into the details of that. We use machine learning model or logistic regression model, all of those. What was the goal? The goal was to have high accuracy predictive model. So if we know the levee height, if we know flood height, we can use those models to come up with predictive kind of like a probability of failure of those levee system. So that one major issue with linear infrastructure like levees, like road, is the extent of them. So you have a model for one side, but how do you want to implement that in the overall like a region? So to address that, we implemented our model in a regional scale framework. This is the regional scale framework that we developed. We implemented the model into a GIS platform, and then we collected data from different sources, and those are the input layers. And the idea was we can create basically a map of probability of failures for different regions. And those are some of the results. And we did test that under different scenarios. And some of the results are very interesting to show how risk can change in a changing climate. The left figure shows the probability of failure for a 25-year flood under historic data, using historic data. The probability of failure that we had, or the overtop levees percentage, is less than 0.1%. And then we said that, okay, let's look at 50-year flood under historic data. The chance increased to 1%, the proportion of overtop levee. But then we use projected future data. Look at the percentage of overtop levee, increase up to 53%. So now what did we do? We developed a quantitative model to be able to identify risk under current and projected future. We did that under different scenarios, but I'm just showing one scenario here. Okay, the second thing that we did, and this is an ongoing work, let's shift the gear from water to heat. You might have seen in the news that delays in Amtrak, or other railroad systems due to heat waves. Heat waves actually can impact railroad system in different ways. The first immediate structural impact is what is called sunking or buckling of rails. You have increased temperature, and then it will cause buckling of rails. And when temperature exceeds a certain threshold, based on maintenance guidelines that they have to lower the speed of the trains to, if the maximum, for example, is 70 miles, they have to reduce it, to 45 miles. So it causes that. There are some other factors. It will cause issue with signal communication, those systems. And there are some other impact, of course, passenger health or other impact. So we noticed there is so many reports of delays, accidents, and also maintenance orders that they have to basically, it will be triggered once you exceed a certain threshold. But we noticed that there is no national assessment of the problem and what if type of model. So we started working on it. And the first thing that we did is, this is a study that we are working on right now. First thing first, we did exposure analysis, working with colleagues from hydrology and hydroclimatology. We got patterns of temperature and heat wave. And the way that you define heat waves can be different, but we use the definition that is used by rail sector in the US. And we wanted to see the level of exposure. What we learned was over the past 45 years, or about 50 years, over 95 million miles of railroad system have been exposed to extreme heat in the United States. Over 95 millions, which is significant. And this is the number of days. This is the results that we created. Basically, we created patterns of heat waves, and then we overlay with the national railroad system. We wanted to see which areas are priority zones. They're getting more and more exposed, railroad system. And then that was something that we also were able to get a database of heat or temperature-related accident in railroad system. And what we did that, this is also exposure. One thing that I wanted to say that the exposure level this is the result from 1979 to 2024. The exposure level has increased significantly. So railroad systems are getting more and more exposed to extreme heat, or what is defined as heat wave, based on the definition that is commonly used. So we said that, okay, that is more exposure. These are the priority zone. What has been the impact? We look at delays. We are modeling delays. And also we look at accidents. And we look at the existing guidelines. There is a guideline saying that if you have, for example, 3 days of, I think, 85 degrees of Fahrenheit, and the 4th day of 90 degrees, I believe, that's basically the triggering point for that inspection or maintenance order. We plotted the distribution of over 2,200 heat-related accidents, which is this distribution. And this red line here shows that the existing maintenance order. What does it tell? By the time that the inspection order is triggered based on existing guideline, we already had more than 90% of accidents happen. It's too late. This is something that we need to revisit that. And then we look at the data in terms of if we have any patterns, temporal and spatial patterns of heat wave and accidents. We definitely noticed that seasonal and annual patterns of increased heat-related accident and temperature in several regions. We did that at the regional level, at the national level, and this is what you see on these slides. Another problem, wildfires. We talked about wildfires. This is a study that we did in 2018. I wanted to include that, but one thing that I'm sure you heard about this is several regions, they're dealing with more wildfire activities. You hear this quite often in the news, but the scientific evidence is in several regions we have even less wildfires, but we have more exposure to wildfires, which will make the impact more significant. That is very important. And this is a study that we published in 2018. We look at wildfires happening in the West Coast. We noticed that not only wildfires burning larger areas, and look at this figure on the top, you see that the burn area from 2006 to 2015 in the West is about the same size of the state of Florida. And we also noticed one more thing. Fires are happening not only exposing more people, are getting more people exposed, but also happening going up to higher altitudes. And it has direct relation with less snowpack. You have less snowpack and fires are going up, or the other way around. So you're dealing with more higher altitudes getting burned. What does it mean? You're exposing. Wildfire means loss of vegetation, loss of those stabilizing factor, which can trigger more problems after fire. In several cases, the impact of wildfire won't stop after you contain a fire. The legacy of fire continue after that, and that's what we call cascading event. So the first thing that we did, actually, my student Amir is here. He did a great job. He took a national database of all wildfires, major fires happened from 1960, 984, that's the latest one. And we did want to see how statistically we are simulating the major fires. Are we correct? Are we correctly modeling them in terms of statistics? We look at different ecoregion and we look at nationwide. One thing that we found, which is major, is based on the current method that we are using, we can significantly underpredict the probability of fires and the burn area using the existing practices. Just look at this one figure, which is for Mid-Atlantic region, not too far from us. What do we show here? Look at the blue line and look at the red dashed line. And the dots, the black dots, are actual fires that happen. The black dots are the actual fires that happen. The blue line is the distribution that is currently used in guidelines for basically to estimate the probability of exceedance that is happening. And the x-axis is the burn area. But then we said that if you consider just focus on extremes and separate extremes from the rest of fires, this is the difference. We noticed that it can be major underestimation of burn area and probability of fire. So, and then we overlay the actual fire to show how closely you can capture it if you separately analyze extremes versus the regular fires. And the implication can be significant. Just look at this one fire in North Carolina. If you don't consider separate distribution for fires extremes, you can underpredict by 102 times. And the same thing for burn area. And then we said that, okay, after fire, there is a chain of events that is happening. So what we did, we developed a physics-based model on how you can address the impact of fire on soil, near surface processes, and also vegetation. We mapped that, and then we showed that the fire can increase the chance and likelihood of landslide by 25%. So we quantified the risk of fires. Then step 4, how we can develop adaptation strategies with communities and stakeholders. I'm running out of time, but the whole idea is how we can develop with stakeholders and communities to identify actions that we need to take and the timing of those actions, called pathways. This is DAP. This is something that proposed by a group in basically in the Netherlands. We adopted this concept. For flood, we identified several adaptation measures, and we used that to identify advantages, disadvantages, trade-offs, and co-benefit for each option. And then we proposed this notion of equity in levee resilience. We said that first thing first, without any adaptation, you have to identify a risk for all communities, separately for disadvantaged and non-disadvantaged community, and then define your adaptation measures to improve both curves and minimize the gap. So it's a multi-objective optimization problem to have that. And then we define basically optimal adaptation as something that is technically sound, socially just, and practically feasible. So this is a multi-objective optimization problem. This is something that we are doing. I'm not going to get into the details of that. This is something that my student Asar is working kind of to identify how we should identify the optimal action and timing of adaptation. Let's skip that. This is the flowchart of that. But the last step is to do monitoring. Once you implemented that, the last step is to make sure you achieve the goal of resiliency and equity. We develop a matrix of basically performance metrics on what we are capturing and why it matters. What should we monitor? Do we need to take action modification as we implemented that? So we define that in terms of what are the success criteria, performance metrics, and how frequently we have to monitor them. Those are defined for each particular project in close collaboration with the stakeholders and community residents. So to wrap up, addressing issues of climate resiliency and equity poses a new class of multidisciplinary problems. We have to work across different disciplines to address them. This is something that we can do, but each of us, we have to take our own role in this multidisciplinary framework. And we have been applying this 5-step in different applications. And then, since that's the only thing that I do, and in all of my projects, we decided to create a course with my colleague, Dr. Paul Christian. So we created a course, and we are off. Actually, I'm teaching it in 1 hour or 2 hours. I have to teach the class. It's called Resilient and Equitable Infrastructure. If you're interested, you're more than welcome to sign up for the next time that we are offering the course. With that, I'm going to finish my presentation and hopefully we'll have time for questions.
Thank you very much. We have time for one or two questions.
I kind of have two, but I'm going to try to see if I can make them one. So I'm really interested in sort of the interplay between these factors. So you mentioned fire increasing landslide frequency, but I think drought does the same thing because the soil doesn't absorb the water very much and you end up with all sorts of problems. And so to what degree are you modeling across all these different things? And then I'm just thinking about the psychological, the recency, the fear of the recency. In California, everybody's thinking about fires. No one's thinking about landslides, or maybe a very subset of the community is thinking about landslides. What would a psychologist say on how to elevate that as a risk factor?
Great questions. Both of them are like something that we have been working on. We are working on it. The first question is, yes, when you're talking about wildfire and landslide, I just presented wildfire and landslide, but the reality is there's a chain of events. We are working from upstream like as stressors. Typically, it happened in California. They have 5-year severe drought, creating fuels for fires, and then fires happen, the next rain season hits, and they got landslide and debris flow. Yes, we are trying to capture the whole spectrum from upstream stressors, and that's why we have people with expertise in, hydroclimatology and hydrology to capture spatial patterns of those. That was the first question. The second question, the psychological response is very important, and it has to go also with that objective versus subjective. First, on that notion of cascading event, we are exploring how this repeated exposure to those events will have this like a collective traumas. That repeated exposure will have psychological impact. We have colleagues in psychology. We look at the impact, and that will have a major factor in level of preparedness. You mentioned about wildfires in the West Coast and lack of preparedness for the example of that. We have the same issue in the East Coast in terms of wildfires. This lack of preparedness, this perceived risk. Studies show that for the same burn area, same burn acres, wildfire in the East can be more deadly and more costly. Why? Because of the dense population, because of the oldest inventory of building that we have, and very unique wildland-urban interface that we have in the Northeast region. This lack of preparedness, how many people they really care about rank wildfire as one of their top priorities? Remember, last year or the year before, we had several wildfires in Massachusetts. We see more and more often happening, but that psychological response, that has a major impact in the level of preparedness and how seriously you take any stressors. But great questions.